Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Tales from the Fandom. I cannot believe that November is almost to a close. I hope that the year has been good for you, my listeners, as it has been for me as we get into the last month of 2017. We have a great lineup of shows for you coming in December, which I just want to quickly run down for you. December 4th, we have episode 86 with Victoria Rogers. She is the dungeon master of the latest all-female actual play D&D podcast called The Broadswords. So I hope that you will check them out and take a listen to her episode. On December 11th, we have episode 87 with Dharajba Chauhan. She is a friend of the podcast that I've known for about 8 or 9 years now, and I had a blast recording with her, and I'm already hoping that I can get her back on for another episode. December 15th, we continue the Book Trek series as Jaquel and I tackle the fourth book in the Iron Druid Chronicles, Tricked. So take a listen and be sure to read along with us. Episode 88 comes out on December 18th with Beck, also known as Astra Planeta Cosplay. She is a English, as in overseas England, cosplayer who's just starting out, so that's a fun interview, and you should definitely check out her Facebook page. She's doing really fun stuff, and I think that you would enjoy getting to see her work. We also have episode 89, which is December 25th, Christmas, with Brett Stewart. He is from the Silver Screens and Politics podcast, and you might have heard him before on the Geek Cinema Society podcast, and that's a really great recording. We also have another novella that we tackle for Book Trek with the Iron Druid Chronicles, which is called Two Ravens, One Crow. I believe that's going to come out December 29th, but just take a look at our Facebook page or Facebook group, Tales from the Fandom, so you can stay up to date with those release dates. There are going to be some special episodes peppered in throughout the rest of December, just some special year-end reviews with guests that are going to come back and talk about 2017 fandoms and 2018 things that they're looking forward to. So I hope you tune in, subscribe, share your favorite episodes, tweet, like the Facebook page, join the fandom group. I am here for you guys, and without your listens and comments, I would not really have much of a podcast to do. So take a listen, enjoy the episode, and thank you so much.
Do you enjoy being a fly on the wall, getting to listen in on a conversation and learning things about the people involved? Hi, I'm Rhett Hall, and I host the Brain Trust Brothers podcast, where every week I bring the audience along to listen in on a conversation between myself and someone that I find interesting. It could be another podcaster, an actor, or just some guy from down the street. You never know what you're going to get, but you can always count on it being fun, informative, and entertaining. You can find the podcast every Tuesday on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or by visiting braintrustbros.com/podcast. Join me as I try to make the world a better place, one conversation at a time.
And welcome back to Tales from the Fandom, the podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And one of my favorite things that I get to do on this podcast is talk to people all across the country, and not only the country, but across the world. And we are back in England with Joseph Sale. Joseph, how are you doing today?
I'm bodacious. David, how are you doing?
I am doing pretty well. We're recording this in August. I'm pretty sure this episode will come out in a couple of months, so we're pretty safe on anything that might be in the spoiler territory if we happen to go there. But for those people who don't know who you are, how about you introduce yourself to those who are listening?
Oh, go for it then. My name is Joe Sale, as you've said. I am a writer based in the UK. I write a mixture of horror and fantasy and sci-fi. I'm also contribute to magazines like Storgy magazines. I contribute reviews, and also to GameSpew, which is like a video game online zine. So I write articles and feature pieces for them. And then lastly, I'm an editor and a publisher at 13 Dark. So I'm publishing 13 pieces of dark fiction by some authors that I absolutely adore. So that's pretty much me.
Okay, great. And for those people who might recognize that 13 Dark, that is a Kickstarter that got turned into an Indiegogo project, I believe. And I talked with one of my friends from North Carolina, Eden, who was a contributor for that project.
Yeah, Eden's one of our star writers, and she's absolutely fantastic. Her work's just really powerful and really fits with the themes of what we're trying to do at 13 Dark. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be sitting where she was sitting previously, virtually speaking.
Yes. It'd be nice to get over there, but the budget for this podcast is very limited.
One day.
But yeah, definitely. And it's, I've gotten to talk to you and to a few other people that have been involved with Storgy and the Exit Earth project, and it's wonderful to just be getting to be included in just helping out and getting even people just to listen and get interested in that.
It's a British takeover. Slowly but surely, we're going to take over the podcast until you realise that it's all British guests, and we've all just swapped ourselves out.
As long as maybe somebody could take us in over there, it'd be a little bit nice. Do you want me to call you Joe or Joseph before we get further into this?
Let's be friendly. You can call me Joe.
Okay. So Joe, on top of being a writer, obviously, like, there is influential fandoms that have been part of your life. What are some of the fandoms that you'd love to talk about today on the podcast?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's so many fantastic fandoms out there. It really is hard to narrow it down. And that's one of the things about being a fan, I think, is once you open yourself up to kind of completely commit to one universe and fall in love with that universe, you kind of open yourself up to keep doing that over and over again. So I think it's very easy for us fans to get into lots of different things. But if I had to narrow it down, I'm a massive Game of Thrones nerd, a Lord of the Rings buff. I am a brown coat. I love Firefly, and I also love 2000 AD. I love Judge Dredd and Slain and all those universes. So lots of different fandoms going around, but those are some of the main ones.
Well, let's dive right in. We'll pick up with Game of Thrones. And obviously, let me just put that out for everybody, just in case we dive into spoiler territory. That there may be spoilers on this, but again, like I said, by the time this episode comes out, hopefully people have seen it. If not, then I apologize. I guess my first question, Joe, is: were you a fan of the books first, or did you get into the TV series first?
That's a really great question. So I resisted Game of Thrones. I wasn't even aware of the books. All I was aware of was that this series had come out and everyone was talking about it. And I resisted for so long, because I had all these very highfalutin ideas about what fantasy should be. And they were talking about all this sex and violence and kind of gratuity. And I just thought, oh, no, that's not fantasy. Fantasy is hobbits. And I kind of resisted it. But then eventually I sat down and I did watch the first 3 episodes of the first season, and I think most people who like Game of Thrones, it's the 3rd episode. It's Bran being thrown out the window by Jaime Lannister. That is the key moment early on that kind of makes you realize, wow, this is something very different. Nobody is safe. The plot is not going to be predictable. There are real consequences. People make mistakes and they suffer consequences. So that was an amazing moment. So then after that, I then went to the books and I read all the books and then went back to the series. It's kind of, I guess, the series first technically, but I did, once the series had intrigued me, I did go to the books because I wanted, that added depth and I wanted that source material. So it's, yeah, so the books were very important to me. It's just a shame that obviously we didn't have all of them at the time, and now the series has caught up. So
Right, and that's the exact method that I got into it. Was I watched the first season without knowing that it, like, I guess I had heard about it and people had said, oh, it's based on a book series. Okay, I watched the first season, loved it, and I think I read all of the books that were out at the time. I don't know if Dances with Dragons was out at the time or if it had just come out, but I read all of them before the second season had come out, and I was like, okay, I'm good and I'm ready. And it's incredible because and I have a friend that's just starting to read the books now after having been just watching the series, and I said, you're going to love the books because the books add so many layers of story that you don't get. Like you hear certain things that, oh, this happened over on the other side, or this battle happened, but you get to actually get all those details and the richness of that world and these other characters that you've never heard of, or maybe you've heard them talk about but you've never seen. And it's really just a incredible story. And I guess the one thing that disappoints me is I wish that he was faster as a writer. I understand, and I'm not a published author, so I don't know, but it just seems like maybe we should have some more books. But again, you write at your own pace, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a really interesting interview with him very recently on the South Bank show, I think, where he kind of talked about his writing process and talked about the show and how that had overtaken him. And it really gave me an interesting new perspective on it, hearing him talk about it, hearing it in his words, as it were. And I think he's trying to write a story that is not trope laden and that is not following these formulas and these conventions. And he's trying to write a story that is driven by the characters. And I think one of the criticisms of some of the more recent series is that the plot has perhaps become more important than the characters in some instances. So it's interesting because I on the one hand, I would love to have the next two Game of Thrones books out, and I am obviously as frustrated as anyone else that we don't have the chance to read them yet. At the same time, as a writer, I understand the pressure he's under, and I understand that he wants to make these books the best they can be, and he wants the stories to come from an authentic place. And you can't. I think if he was just, the very nature of Game of Thrones is that it does feel so raw and so authentic, and the characters feel so real. And I think you can't bang that out. I think, this is not a book by numbers, so I can see why it's taking him so long. Although you may also believe the conspiracy theories that he's already written them and he's just been paid a lot of money not to release them before the series finishes, whichever you choose to believe.
Oh my goodness, there is a lot of different conspiracy theories out there when it comes to Game of Thrones.
Absolutely.
Now,
I saw a very radical one recently.
Oh, what was that one?
About the identity of the Night King, but I don't want to say just in case it's right, because it was pretty compelling, but it made some very interesting points, and just type it into YouTube if you wanna look down that rabbit hole.
It might have been the same one that I saw recently. I just read another one this morning about alternate timelines, and I was like, oh, that could be something too.
Yeah, I think we may have seen the same one there. Very interesting stuff.
Now, I love to find out, especially like when it comes to Game of Thrones or like Star Wars or Star Trek, all the different like fandoms that have not segregated lines, but like different choices you could make. Which house is your favorite?
That's a brilliant question, and that's not an easy one to answer. There's so much choice there, and as is typical of Martin and Game of Thrones, it's more complex. It's not as simple as good and bad, and villains and heroes. There's duality on all sides. I mean, I think wolves are pretty cool. I think the Starks, everyone, despite how much they've suffered, I think deep down we all want to be a Stark. We all want to belong to that family, and be really honourable and stoic and kind of truthful, and we want to be those guys. But, I think if I'm brutally honest, I think I probably am a Lannister, a sneaky Southerner, and and yeah, I mean, I think particularly recently in the later series, Tyrion and Jaime have become two such interesting characters now for me. I find both of them just so compelling in different ways. Particularly Jaime, I think, he just keeps evolving. I think maybe we've not seen quite enough of Tyrion recently, and he's not been kind of at his best. But Jaime, on the other hand, I think he just keeps going from strength to strength every season. It's just amazing. So that development and how damaged he is as a character is fascinating. So I guess, if we're talking about which house I want to belong to in terms of which side I want to be on, I guess I want to be, a Stark and on the side of the Starks and be a part of the pack. But if we're talking about who I find most interesting, I think, the Lannisters, particularly Tyrion and Jaime, are just fascinating studies.
When it comes to, because, again, we have the book series and we've got the TV series. For me, it varies wildly as far as characters. And I think that on the side, and I've talked to friends about this, when I ask, their favorite character, it swings wildly based on well, are you asking me favorite character on a book or favorite character on the TV series? Does yours, do you have a favorite character that overlaps both the series and the book series, or is it relegated oh, well, in the books I like this character, but in the TV series I like this character?
That's another brilliant question. Yeah, I think up to season 4 of the series, it was the same character. I think Tyrion in the books and in the series was the character. I just found him so fascinating. He was so well acted by Peter Dinklage. And I think he was just so compelling in so many ways. Now, I think Tyrion is probably still my favourite from the book, perhaps. And in the series, yeah, it's difficult to say, but, Jaime is one of them, definitely. Jorah, even though he's, a B-lister in many ways, not like a main character, but I just find Jorah Mormont fascinating. I think both of those characters actually are linked in a way, because they're both kind of interpretations of Thomas Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur. They're kind of Martin's version of knights from that kind of Arthurian period. So Mormont, Jorah, is the courtisan. He is the courtly love, the love that can never be fulfilled. He has this object of desire in Daenerys, his queen, who he serves and who he fights for. But that love is never consummated. They will never be together. But that doesn't diminish the love and the power of that. So that is one really interesting kind of modern version. I mean, the joke is that he's Mr. Friendzone. But I think what Martin is doing there really is riffing on that medieval theme of courtly love, that love unfulfilled, that it drives these knights to these feats of incredible heroism. And then Jaime, of course, really, he is Lancelot. He is kind of a modern interpretation of Lancelot, this supposedly perfect knight who has it all, but who's just actually so corrupt and damaged, really. But that doesn't diminish his heroism and his good qualities. So I think, both of those characters really interest me for those reasons, and just I think the two actors, Ian Glenn for Jorah and oh my god, my mind's just gone blank for Jaime. But I think he's a phenomenal actor as well, the actor who plays Jaime Lannister. So Yeah, really, really stellar stuff. What about you?
Oh man, I mean, I've always been a person that really loved Tyrion as far as a character in both the books and the series.
Mm.
And though like it overlaps, and I think part of it, as far as the character in the series, it goes to Peter Dinklage, because I've loved him as an actor for a long time, and just getting to see him just work his magic has been incredible. But again, in like the TV series, and I've said it on different episodes with other people, is that I really enjoy like background characters or those side characters.
Yeah.
And so like I like Samwell Tarly. I like Tormund, who has been incredible this season.
Yeah.
You know, it's just getting to know like those really smaller characters, and you get to grow with them. Even like the and I don't even recall his name, the guy who has been in the Night's Watch with Jon and Samwell for the whole time, and now he's the head of the Night's Watch.
Oh
like,
my God, Ed, is it? Is it Ed?
Yeah, Dolores said that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yes. Like getting to see him, and just like he doesn't have to be a main character, even like a sidekick, but getting to see him and like grow with him as he's gone from who he was at the beginning of the series to like head of the Night's Watch now, it's just been really fun for like to grow with those characters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I did want to ask, because you do love, Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, parallels between Samwise Gamgee and Samwell Tarly. Do you see them? Do you like, is that something where you're like, oh, look, it's another Sam character?
That's another really interesting parallel between kind of that Martin's kind of making and choosing that name. Sam, it is such a loaded name for us fantasy readers now. I think they're very different characters in many ways. You know, Sam is in Game of Thrones is an intellectual, and whereas Samwise, in Lord of the Rings is a person of the earth. He is salt of the earth. He's a gardener. He is not intellectual or academic. He is straight talking, and so you kind of have different things going on there. I mean, I think faithful friend, and obviously they both kind of share this being taunted for being overweight and stuff. So there are like parallels there, and I'm sure that's deliberate. But I think they are so different in so many ways, and Samwell Tarly is. I almost think that's George R.R. Martin kind of putting himself in the story. He's the nerd. He's the the bookish person who can't do what all these heroes do, but he can write. That's what he can do. He can use his mind, and I wonder whether, similarly to kind of Frodo writing the story of Lord of the Rings in the Red Book, and that becoming this kind of meta thing in which we're kind of almost led to believe the Lord of the Rings book we're reading has been written by Frodo in some way. Mm-hmm. I think we may get a little bit of that in Game of Thrones. I think we may get Samwell Tarly shutting the book at the end, reading to his grandchildren, or to the decimated corpses of his entire civilization, whichever ending we're going for, man. But so I think definite parallels, but I think the thing about Samwise in Lord of the Rings is he the hero of the story? It's this age-old question. Who is really the hero of Lord of the Rings? Is it Aragorn? Is it Frodo? Is it Sam? It seems to be Frodo. We follow him for the longest time. But could anything have actually been achieved without Samwise Gamgee? And what he represents in that, I think Tolkien fought in World War I. He went through World War II. And he witnessed the heroism of everyday people, of people who were just just gardeners and factory workers, and then they were put in this dire and dreadful situation, and they emerged like heroic and with the strength to carry this terrible burden. And so I think there's a lot of that going on with Sam in Lord of the Rings. We'll have to wait and see whether that similar kind of thing is going to go on with Sam in Game of Thrones, whether he's going to get a slightly different character arc, because I think that will be the deciding factor of whether we're getting Sam 2.0 or not.
Who would you love to see? Okay, so the series ends. Let's say that the army of the dead is actually defeated. We don't go into the realm of it ends on a down note. So who would you like to see at the end on the Iron Throne ruling the great houses of Westeros? I mean, what's left of the houses of Westeros, I should say.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think there's two answers to it as well for me. There's the answer of, in terms of morally, who do I think deserves to actually sit on the Iron Throne? In terms of, who are good people? What's the dream team for looking after the kingdom? And then there's, as a writer, but if that dream team sits on the throne, it's going to be way too neat. It's going to be too neat. It's going to be too happy. It's going to be too expected. And I honestly don't think that Martin is going to... I don't think he can possibly give us that ending. And I think it would be a mistake to. I think he would undermine so much of the amazing work he's done. So I think we're not going to get that. I think we're going to get something a little bit darker. But if in terms of the dream team, it would have to be like Daenerys on the throne, Jon as Warden of the North, and Tyrion as the Hand. Sorry, I think that is who we want. What we kind of want to do with the throne situation at the end of Game of Thrones, provided the army of the dead is defeated, that is. But I think what we might get is something a little different. I think, I don't know who's going to make it through. But I think if the three main characters really at this point, are probably Tyrion, Daenerys, and Jon. So for all three of them to make it through, I don't know. I think we're going to lose one of them, at least. So that will be really interesting about how that's going to come about. Who is going to inherit the throne? Are we even going to get a royal, Tolkien was really, love him to bits, obviously possibly my favourite writer of all time, but he was really quite a royalist. It was the king was in the right, you were born to be king, it's about the blood, and if you've got the king's blood in you, you're meant to be on the throne, and you're going to be a better king than somebody like Denethor, who is very clever and he's learned, but he is not the king because he's not born the king. Mm-hmm. So There's kind of a message there that is, I guess, for our modern tastes, a little bit off. And obviously, Frodo and Sam are like the key players and they're not royal at all. So, he doesn't go full royalist, it's not Aragorn carrying the ring to Mount Doom. But there's a note there which I think we find difficult, or most people find difficult. So I don't think Martin really is of that disposition. So I think we're getting a lot of information about, who's of the Targaryen blood and who is the right descendant. But I'm wondering whether he's going to flip that all on its head because, do we want more bloodlines, really? Or do we want, do we want somebody who's right for the job, who's not necessarily entitled? But having said that, Jon probably is right for the job. But anyway, we will see.
It was interesting because I was going over things yesterday before seeing the finale, and my thought was, there's not that many actual houses left. There's there's the Starks, the Lannisters, the Targaryens, and then you got a lot of the minor houses because you've lost Baratheon, you've lost Martell, you've lost the Tyrells, you've lost a lot of like those big houses that were really over. So you either get like new houses, or you just break the Westeros up into like the north, the south, the east, and the west, and that's it, and go from there. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, number one, how the show deals with it, if they even deal with it at all, or if how the books touch on it, and go from that perspective.
It's really interesting, because I mean that would mean Daenerys has kind of literally broken the wheel. She has literally demolished. And they've demolished it themselves as well, to be fair. But there was that kind of scene early on in season 7 with which had Ed Sheeran in it, where Arya sat down and was chatting to all those Lannister soldiers, and a lot of people said, "Oh, it was unnecessary." But I think what I got from that scene was, look how young all the soldiers are now. You know, they're kids, and to me, it was a bit of world building. It was saying, you know, all the old generation of soldiers are dead. Literally all of them. They've wiped out an entire kind of generation with all this warfare, and now they're having to push these, you know, 17, 18, 19-year-old kids really, you know, to the front line. And that, because of course that is literally what happened in World War II and World War One, really. I mean, so many people died. There was actually, you know, a repopulation question. Actually, Jesus, we don't have enough people alive to do enough of the work in the country, to do enough, you know, it was a complete devastation. So for me, that scene, although, you know, was Ed Sheeran necessary or not? Probably not. But that scene kind of did do some work in terms of, as you say, showing that, you know, there's not really much of any of the houses left. They're all crumbling. The Greyjoys are probably, you know, there's not going to be much of them left either by the time they've been warring amongst themselves for years and years. So it's going to be really, really interesting as to where it goes, as you say.
Absolutely. Now let's transition. Obviously, we've interwoven, you know, Lord of the Rings into Game of Thrones. So Lord of the Rings is one of those fandoms where it's some of the initial start of people actually getting into like the science fiction and fantasy genre. I remember getting the box set when I was probably like 11 or 12. Wow. I had gotten the box set for Christmas. And this is like way before the movies. This was back in like the early 90s when I first learned of it and read The Hobbit and got into it, and just that was like the initial foray into something bigger than I guess I had known Star Wars, and I had kind of like gotten into Star Trek a little bit, but Lord of the Rings was like that big hook for me. For you, was it the same? Like, was it something that, I mean, and I guess being over in England, is it a bigger thing there than it is, or is it more ingrained in the population or in the populace of England as a book series?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I've said that almost every question you've asked, but it's true. These are all really interesting questions. Yeah, I think it is very ingrained in us. We're very proud of Tolkien, although we have this problem in England with this kind of hangover aristocracy, by which we still have this kind of snootiness towards genre fiction and, you know, sci-fi and fantasy and horror. You know, there's still a lot of kind of, so at the critical level, the level of the critics, the editors, the publishers, they're still, even to this day, they're trying to say that Lord of the Rings is not proper literature, and it's starting to be broken down now. I actually found myself delighted that Lord of the Rings was on my university syllabus for creative writing with English literature. So, but I was one of the first, you know, my class was one of the first classes to had the pleasure of actually studying it in a university environment, whereas as I gather in the US, Tolkien's been available to study for a degree for years and years and years. I think it's the same kind of weird thing where the US own more first folio Shakespeares than the UK. You're more enthusiastic about Shakespeare than we are, which is truly truly bizarre. You'd think we'd have a national holiday for Shakespeare's birthday and a national holiday for Tolkien's birthday and dress up as hobbits once a year. I don't know, but for some reason we are a bit repressed like that, actually. So I think it's not as ingrained as you might think. Having said that, most people have given it a go at least once, I think, and it is the starting point for a lot of people. It was probably the starting point for me. I think in very close proximity, I read The Lord of the Rings and I watched The Empire Strikes Back. And the two of those things together, that was, Lord of the Rings, I'm in love with it, and every time I read it, I fall in love with it a little bit more, and I see more detail in it. When I first read it, I was far too young, really. I couldn't take all of it in, and the style was quite difficult for me. I didn't get the full. I got a sense of this awesome kind of power and this world, but it was almost overbore me. It was too much, overwhelmed me. So. But then The Empire Strikes Back, that was visual and simpler. So you kind of could get into that a bit more as a younger kid, as a kid of 8 or 9 or something. And then when I was older, I was 11, I tackled Lord of the Rings again. And then I kind of, I felt a bit more ready. I still, think there's bits I struggled with and language that is quite challenging and profound, and so I still I had to read it a third time. After the third time, I think I was fully there. I think I got it. I was 20 by that point, so I was ready to take it on. But I had to read Lord of the Rings kind of 3 times really. So I guess it was the start of a lot of things for me, but it was also, as you've mentioned, Star Wars. It was kind of that Empire Strikes Back, which actually was the first Star Wars movie I watched. I watched them out of order. So I saw The Empire Strikes Back first, and that just blew my mind right open. I could not do anything else for days after seeing that. It was all downhill from there with Star Wars.
There you go.
Yep.
On Lord of the Rings, and I've joked about it on other episodes, is that when I first read it, because I was maybe 11 or 12 at that point, I thought Pippin and Merry were both girl hobbits. I was like, okay, girl hobbits on adventure, that's cool. And I remember having nightmares of the ring wraiths. That was a thing for a little bit, and it took a little bit to get over, but now it's where I can read The Hobbit in one sitting within a couple hours and just get through it.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings is one of those books where I have them just like I have the DVDs, and they sit on my shelf, and it's one of those things where I would imagine I need to just prepare myself and be like, okay, I'm going to take a good chunk of time to get through it, because it is an investment in time and going through the motions of reading it. But it's something that I've talked to my kids about, because they want to watch Lord of the Rings. They've played the Lego video game of Lord of the Rings, and they beat it, and they're like, oh, can we watch the movie? I said, no, you guys can't really watch the movie yet, and the book's a bit out of their range at this point too, but eventually they'll get to read it and watch
definitely.
it and get invested in it.
It's really interesting because everyone says how long The Lord of the Rings is, but it's actually the third book of Game of Thrones. I should say A Song of Ice and Fire. That is longer than the entirety of Lord of the Rings, just the third book on its own, in terms of word count. So I think it is long, but it's also the style it's more classical. He's aping epic literature. he set out to write it to create the epic literature that he felt England didn't have. You know, he felt that we borrowed, you know, I mean, I mean specifically England, not Ireland, Wales, and Scotland. They kind of have their legends and their myths. They've called Culcan and all these amazing characters, but he felt England didn't have its own epic and its own myth, whereas we were using the Odyssey and the Iliad, the Greek myths, you know, the Roman myths. We were the Nordic myths, the Finnish myths. You know, we were stealing all of these myths, and we didn't have our own one. So he kind of set out to write it. I was like, oh well, we don't have this, so I'm going to make it. I'm going to make history. And as a result of that, of course, it's what we've got. Why we've got something so wonderful. But it is the language is like more classic, more arcane, more kind of epic and lofty in that respect. So yeah, you can bang through. I banged through Game of Thrones so quickly, even though the word count is extraordinary. It's just so readable. Especially after you get over the first book. I think the first book is a bit more kind of slow to get going. You're kind of finding his feet a bit, and then when you get to like the end of the first book, the second book, and the third book, you're gone by that point, mate. You're addicted.
Absolutely. Do you have a favorite of the Tolkien books? Like, do you have one that you prefer over the others? Like, do you prefer Return of the King or Two Towers, Fellowship?
In terms of the films, I prefer I think the Fellowship of the Ring is my favorite film, even though the Return of the King makes me cry every time. I think that first film, there's something about it. It's weirder. It's weirder. It's darker. It's kind of there's just a feeling when you watch it. I think in terms of the books, it's difficult to say. They've all got incredible moments in. I think the Return of the King, the writing is so powerful. And there's so many bits in it. I think it reaches that. It kind of he kind of paces himself, and then when you get to the Return of the King, you kind of get the full whammy. You reach this kind of denouement, and it all comes together, and the writing reaches its kind of peak, and it is just so powerful. But I must say, the second book, possibly a favourite because simply of one scene in it, which is called Shelob, which is in the second book, I believe, but it's in the third film. And that Shelob scene in the book, they didn't have a hope in hell of recreating the terror of that scene, I don't think. I think they did a phenomenal job, but in the book, that was my nightmare fuel. That was weeks and weeks of just the darkness. It's just inconceivable. I don't know. I still kind of don't know how he really created that atmosphere of dread. I reread that scene sometimes for inspiration for my horror writing and stuff. And King talks about it as a big jumping off point for him as well, in terms of, something he was reading when he was younger that gave him this real sense of dread and terror. And I still kind of marvel at it. You can pick something apart, and sometimes it's still magic. You still don't know how it works.
Again with, we talked about with Game of Thrones having the books and then in this case the movies. Do you have a favorite character that goes across both genres or both mediums, or do you have one that you prefer over the other? Like, I know that there's some criticism in the movies with how Gimli was portrayed, for example, as being more like a comic relief character rather than how he is in the book series. But I was just curious if you had like a favorite character in both mediums, or if they kind of differed for you, either books or the movies.
I think that's really tough to say, actually, because some of it, I think we forget how different the films are sometimes because they've become so iconic in and of their own right. We forget how many changes he made, and I think he was right to make those changes to make them work as films rather than work as books. You can't. Well, maybe certain types of book, but in most cases you can't film a book scene for scene. It doesn't work. It's not the same medium at all. So, I think he made some really good decisions there. I think some of the character decisions, for me, Frodo, the book Frodo is very different. He is, he's 50. He's a middle-aged man. He's quite experienced, and he's not really that naive. He's naive in the way that hobbits are naive, in the sense they've had quite a sheltered existence from the rest of the world. But I think he's a bit darker. I think there's there's this kind of hint that his father killed his mother and then killed himself, Drogo Baggins. There's kind of these whispers of kind of something a bit dark about him, and he is older and therefore and a bit feistier as well. He actually attacks the ringwraiths at Weathertop in the book. He launches himself at them, crying, Elbereth Gilthoniel, and then he is, the Witch King slaps him one, with the Morgul blade. But in the film, him kind of collapsing in terror. I mean, it works. Elijah Wood is a phenomenal actor. I love him to bits as an actor. Saw him in the American adaptation of Dirk Gently recently, and he was just mind-blowingly good in that. So massive respect for him as an actor, and I think he does the role an incredible service. But overall, I think part of me, didn't necessarily agree with that directorial decision to have Frodo be like that. So I think that would be one character who I feel wasn't kind of... I preferred the book, basically, I think, if I was being really candid. But I think they nailed Sam. I think Sam was just exactly what I had in my head. I think Sean Astin is actually Samwise Gamgee, or distantly related to Samwise Gamgee. He may be some kind of reincarnation. Just phenomenal. Nailed it. They absolutely nailed that for me. So, and I think they did some characters better. I think Aragorn is quite arrogant in the book. I think he's quite overconfident. And in the book, he's already been through that period of doubt, where he's questioning who he is and his identity and whether he deserves to be king. He's coming out of that now into this place where he's a bit more confident in himself. And he gets Narsil reforged right away, he ain't hanging around to get a magic sword out of it. He's like, I'm going to need this. That's basically as soon as he gets to Rivendell. So, he's kind of very cocky in the books, and maybe not cocky, but very confident. And I think having Viggo Mortensen portray this kind of slightly more doubtful character humanized him a lot more and made him a lot more accessible for a modern audience. In particular, I think if he'd been swaggering about, it would have been very difficult for us to get on board with him. Who's this guy? But as this kind of guy who's questioning himself, he's very humble. He has this kind of air about him of someone who's very experienced but very kind of considered, and I think that really was wonderful. They moved the drama from the past to the present in that, and that was a really good decision. So there's 3 characters for you. What about you?
For me, it's always been Samwise. I know that I mentioned Samwell Tarly in the Game of Thrones section. I've loved Samwise. Like, I identify with him so much that he's always been, regardless of if it's the movie or if it's the books, it's always been Samwise. There's never been a doubt as far as like a fandom that I love and the character that I love from it. Yeah,
he is just a legend, really. He where would we be without him? He's just so iconic. The spirit of just friendship and endurance and strength. Just what a wonderful creation. But he's so believable as well. I believe that somebody could be as good and as true-hearted as him, because of how it's built up over time. Yeah, extraordinary. I'm with you 100%, man. Let's start a Sam fan club.
It's I just have to say, and it's not even one of the fandoms that you talk about, but those characters, Game of Thrones is, for me, it's like Samwell Tarly is that character that I see in myself. In Lord of the Rings, it's Samwise Gamgee. In Harry Potter, it's Neville Longbottom. It's always those characters
Yeah.
that are like those side characters, but they support and they help and they do what they can for those main characters to get done what needs to get done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those characters are so important, and they are often really where the true emotion comes from. I think Neville is like such a tragic but heroic character, and I think at the end, you do really get a sense of his bravery, and that moves me more than Harry standing up to Voldemort. When Harry stands up to Voldemort, you kind of feel, well, this has been coming for 7 books, and it's his destiny, and yada yada. I mean,
Right.
it's there's epic elements to it, but really you kind of see it coming. Again, Frodo, he's he's destined to have the ring. He's a Baggins. It's in the family. It's kind of he's a great guy and a fascinating character, but it's Sam doesn't need to be there even. Sam Gamgee, he's there just because it's the right thing to do, and that's and he's such an, as you say, it's like these underdog characters who seem to be so much less than their kind of glorious peers, but actually within them kind of lies the key, lies the salvation, and that can be really moving. So I think a lot of, again, I'm 100% with you, man. Those are the characters where it's at, and writers take note. That's the kind of without creating a stereotype, an archetype. That's the kind of character you want to tap into to create that kind of drama and those kind of emotional reactions.
Now, I did have a fandom that you're into, and I've never actually seen it or read it as a comic book or whatnot. And it's 2000 AD's Judge Dredd. Is that, am I correct in?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the one.
I've never seen, I know what it's about in the general sense of, he's judge, jury, executioner. It's a futuristic time period, but beyond that, I have no knowledge of it. So if you could just educate me, because they had the new movie come out, and I know that the comic books have been popular throughout time period. So,
yeah, I think actually this is 2000 AD is mainly it's based in the UK, and I think Judge Dredd has mainly found popularity in the UK. So actually that makes sense that he's not as well known. I think he did tank at the box office as well, despite the fact that I think that movie is actually really brilliant. It's got Lena Headey from Game of Thrones in, and Carl Urban and from Lord of the Rings in. So there we go. The fandoms are all crossing over all over the place. Yeah, I think what's so amazing about 2000 AD's Judge Dredd is that Judge Dredd is this kind of embodiment, I think, of what we all wish we could sometimes do. I think we go through life and we experience all these kind of this pain and this suffering and these dreadful things, and we see all these crimes going unpunished, and we see all these dreadful people getting away with things, or getting off so lightly that they might as well get away with it. And he taps into that part of us that says, you know what, it's vigilante time. It's time to just put this world to rights ourselves and not trust, he is a policeman, but what a policeman. A policeman who's just got a license to do whatever the hell he wants, basically. And it is so satisfying. He is so uncompromising, so kind of brutal. But, of course, he wouldn't be a fully fleshed out three-dimensional character if he didn't have this tiny, 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 tiny kind of spark of humanity in him, and these rare moments where he, exhibits that he is aware of how dreadful things are. He is aware of what he has kind of become, and he does try to be human and to be merciful. And so, there's also a kind of dynamic going on some of the criminals. I mean, we're not even going to talk about the four dark judges. That's a whole thing unto itself. But the criminals in Mega City 1 are so bad that he is a lesser evil, and you want you want the lesser evil to defeat the greater evil. So it's kind of that dynamic. He's not really a good person. In fact, he's a cold-blooded killer, really, but he is better than the alternative. He's kind of lawful evil and surrounded by chaotic evil and true evil. That's kind of the dynamic, and the art is brilliant. A lot of the stories are really interesting. There's a kind of supernatural element to a lot of the stories as well, and parallel dimensions. Some really crazy stuff. My first actual encounter with Judge Dredd was a comic called Die Laughing, which I was definitely too young to read. It was, yeah. There's some panels in there, man. There's some messed up stuff in there, but it was actually a crossover Judge Dredd and Batman comic, in which Batman there's a character called Anderson who is kind of one of Judge Dredd's colleagues. She's another judge. She's a psychic. And through some various shenanigans, there's already been kind of parallel universes in Judge Dredd, so I guess they thought, well, why not, parallel into a DC universe? So we get Batman ending up in Mega City 1, and with Judge Dredd, and there's this kind of pleasure dome that's opening, and these lucky citizens are going to get to go. It's kind of a lottery draw, and they're going to get to go and spend the rest of their lives in the pleasure dome, never have to work, eat all the best food, go on roller coaster rides all day, do other dodgy stuff all day, and live out their lives in this hedonistic glory. But enter the Dark Judges, the four Dark Judges of the Apocalypse, who are Fire, Death, Fear, and Mortis, who is Decay. They're these kind of supernatural dark judges, and they believe that because all crimes are committed by living people, therefore life itself must be a crime. So they turn up to this pleasure dome to crash the party, and they bring with them a demonic version of the Joker. And there's just a massive, epic showdown inside this pleasure dome with Batman and Judge Dredd versus the four dark judges and the Joker in kind of dark judge form. It's mind-blowing. It's truly mind-blowing, and the artwork for it is just absolutely unbelievable. You have to see it to believe it. So Die Laughing. For anyone who wants to know, look that up.
If you were recommending for people to get into the Judge Dredd series, would you recommend them watching the movie, or like looking for like the comics, like you had just said, like the Batman Judge Dredd crossover, to kind of like get their feet wet? Maybe they like Batman, they want to watch or get into Judge Dredd, and that would be a good avenue, or just try and find maybe like back issues or a certain story.
Oh yeah, it's hard to know when to start when you're so into something and you take it for granted. I think, I think the Die Laughing is a good place to start. Obviously, there's a sense that it's confusing because it's the two different universes colliding, but I think it gives you a great sense of who Dredd is. It gives you a great sense of the Dark Judges are like one of my favorite part of that universe, and seeing them, they get a really amazing kind of story in that particular graphic novel. So you just get loads of time, quality time with them. So it's kind of a really good place to start for that. So I think Die Laughing is good, and it's not too long. You can read it quite quickly, and then I'd probably recommend watching the new movie Dredd. There's two Judge Dredd movies. There's an original one which starred, God, was it Dolph Lundgren?
Sylvester Stallone.
Oh, Sylvester Stallone. That's it. Correct. Yes, with Mean Machine in it. That one's. I mean, a lot of people hate on that one. It's very OTT and kind of camp. I guess you don't get the full kind of bleak Judge Dredd experience in that, but I don't think it's dreadful. But I would probably start with the Carl Urban, the modern Dredd. You get a real sense of what it's about. This kind of awful city that just goes on forever and is just full of all these slums. You get Anderson, you get loads of really interesting dynamics, and you get just incredible bolt gun action. So it's basically Die Hard in Mega City 1. It's just a pretty brilliant film.
Okay, awesome. And as I said at the beginning of our episode, you are not only a writer, you're an editor, you're very involved in like reviews and much more than what I'm saying here. I guess my first question is, how did you decide on the path of going into writing?
Oh wow, does anyone decide? Does anyone think that it's a good idea? No, it's it's yeah, I think you do decide. I think it is a vocation. It is something that one feels a calling to. And I think actually, corny though this is, I think I have always wanted to be a writer. I kind of experimented with different things. I tried to become an actor at one point, but then I realized that really what I was most interested in was the words on the page, and I wanted to play with those words, and I wanted to do different things, and I wanted to kind of write my own scripts. And then I tried to become a game developer as well at one point in my life. I tried to learn to code and to build things. I love video games as well. That's a kind of whole other set of fandoms that we probably will not have time to talk about. But so I tried different things, but I always have come back to writing. I've always come back to the joy of telling stories. And I think that first began with my father telling me stories as a kid. And he's a poet. He's a great writer. He runs his own business now, which is actually a very creative business. But he, in his heart, I think he's a poet and a storyteller, and he used to tell these incredible stories to me. And what he used to do is just mix things up. He used to mix up all these different characters and from books and movies. And I remember one particularly vivid story he told had Batman versus Frankenstein's monster, but then he'd mixed it with like a story which I later actually found in an old Spider-Man comic. He'd kind of taken this story from this Spider-Man comic, but he put in these different characters, and like they were just so phenomenal, and when you are just listening to that at such a young age, and it's so inspiring and you're so captivated and you just think, I want to do that. So I guess that was, very, very early on, I kind of got this thirst for that joy of storytellings and what stories could really be. So I think, boring though it is, it has been there from the beginning for me, and it's just it's expressed itself in different forms and chased different rabbits down different rabbit holes, but ultimately it's kind of always come back to the same thing.
What kind of material, and I know that you cover a lot of different, you wear a lot of different hats as far as publishing and writing, but what kind of stories do you tell?
Oh, that's a dream question to be asked. Everyone wants to be asked this. It's also a very difficult question to answer. We don't really know ourselves. We need other people to see into us. Self-knowledge is very difficult. Very few people are kind of have that really deep self-knowledge, and writers generally are the worst people to ask about their own writing. So many author interviews I've read or seen, somebody gets asked, about their own work, and they almost don't see the points they're making with their own writing. And you don't, because there's such an unconscious dimension to the process of writing. So many things are going in and that you're not even aware of. So as best as I can, I will answer your question. Now I've made my excuses for giving you a terrible answer. What I am mainly trying to do is to write stories which kind of reflect the reality that I see, but the kind of which I guess every writer's trying to do, but for me, I've had a quite an interesting life. Everyone's got an interesting life, but I think I've had some unique encounters with the supernatural and with a lot of spiritual elements, and these have really shaped who I am, and they're very much a part of me. And I think a lot of people, especially today, feel this big disconnect from everything, from other people, from the world, the natural world, the modern world, the civilized world, the whole world, and they feel this big lack of purpose, this big lack of kind of meaning. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, and our society and why it's become like that. But when you've had these kind of experiences that go beyond what we would define maybe as like the scientific norm, if indeed such a thing exists, given that quantum physics has already proven merely observing things in our universe actually changes their atomic structure. So, we're supposed to believe that the universe is limited to all these scientific laws, but we're supposed to also believe at the same time that science is proving day by day that, we are shaping our own universe as we're kind of interacting with it and perceiving it, and everyone is actually kind of creating their own universe. It's unbelievable. It's ridiculous. It's like something from a fantasy novel. So I guess what I want to do is write about those experiences in a real way. So much of fantasy is like people doing the cool thing. They kind of think, oh, it would be cool if I put werewolves into this story. And werewolves are cool. And it will be, like, there's nothing wrong with that. Vampires are cool, and like ghosts are cool. But if you've ever seen a ghost, or you've ever heard the voice of a dead person, you kind of realize, and it's the most hair-raising, the most terrifying, the most awe-inspiring experience that you could have. I want to show people that in my writing, if it's even possible to do that. So I guess, I want to kind of assure those other people, millions of people who have these kind of experiences, I want to give them the kind of stories that they can really connect with, because they can see that it's coming from a truthful place. It's not coming from a place of like, I like this genre. Although that, I mean, I do love the genre, and, I love dragons flying around, and I just love that for what it is. But I think there's a deeper connection as well. There's a deeper kind of mystery that I feel compelled to explore. So that's all very, like, weighty and literary. The long and short of it is I like supernatural horror, and that's what I kind of what I'm interested in, and stories with that kind of spiritual dimension. Stories with that spiritual dimension to them, go a little bit deeper. True Detective, those kind of things. That's what I'm interested in doing myself as well, and what I like to read, and as well as fantasy. Although I think a lot of fantasy is quite spiritual, actually. The really deep stuff, the really good stuff.
What can you tell me either about? I know that your latest book, and I have it up. It's and I don't want to mispronounce it, so I know it starts with an N.
Yeah, this was possibly a mistake to call it the fancy name. It's Nekia, so okay. Or Nekia is fine. It's a Greek word. It means a rite by which you summon the dead in order to learn about the future, because the dead exist outside of time. So it's a kind of, in the Odyssey of Homer, Odysseus goes to the land of the dead to actually find out about his future, what's going to happen to him. So it's a trope of literature, and we see it actually time and time again. It sounds all very lofty when you're kind of talking about the Odyssey and stuff, but we see it in so much of modern stuff. Characters go to the Matrix, they have to see the Oracle, they have to go to that place of the dead, either literally or metaphorically, go to that place that's kind of a little bit beyond our world to kind of discover what their fate is. So Nekia is the name of a place in that book. A place that is kind of drawing together all these characters from different worlds. And some of these characters appear in other books by me, some of them are new, and they're all being drawn to this place for different reasons, which become apparent later on in the story.
And on top of that, you are doing you're doing 13 Dark.
Yeah.
And what's the status of 13 Dark? Because last time I was talking with Eden, which I mentioned at the beginning, where we were promoting the Kickstarter, and then it went to Indiegogo to be funded there.
Yeah.
And I believe it is funded, at least the first issue.
Yeah, so the first issue's been funded. So, I mean, I must just say at this point, a massive thank you to everyone who did come out and back us, both the Kickstarter and the Indiegogo. If anyone here is listening, just the biggest thank you. It could not have happened without you, and we're very grateful for your support. And obviously, the Kickstarter was not a success. It was, we raised like £4,500, but it wasn't quite enough. It wasn't quite enough to meet our target. So none of that money was taken, obviously. The Kickstarter just fails and you don't get anything. So then we found ourselves in a bit of a tricky position, but thankfully loads of people came forward. They bought book bundles from us. They bought writing coaching from me. They bought copies of my books. So they really invested. They said they wanted to keep it going. They didn't want it to just die off. And luckily, we kind of got enough going that we could give it another try with the Indiegogo. So the Indiegogo was a success. It was just for the first issue. It was much more modest in terms of its ambition. We've actually exceeded our goal, which is great. We have a stretch goal open at the moment. If we get to £1,000 of backing, then we'll add a fourth story into the mix. The first issue's got 3 stories. I will just say, just in case anyone's thinking, well, that doesn't sound like very much. They're 3 longer stories. They're kind of in between short stories and novels. And there's also a lot of artwork that goes with them. So artwork is done by Grand Failure and by Sean Langley. Sean is an incredible artist based in the US who's doing some just mind-blowing pieces of concept art for us. It's just such a pleasure to work with him. So yeah, so the issue is up and off the ground. If we get to £1,000 of backing, we'll add a 4th story in it, and it will be even bigger and better. And we're hoping to deliver the issue by September. So we're just waiting for one more piece of concept art from Sean, and we're waiting to see if we can meet the stretch goal. And if we can do the stretch goal by September, then we will be sending out an issue with 4 stories in and 4 pieces of art, plus extras. And if not, then we'll be sending out one out with 3. But either way, it's fantastic. It's happening. Sean and the writers have been paid. Yeah, I'm really, really excited to see what people think of it. If you've missed the Indiegogo, we're in demand. So basically that means that our page on Indiegogo just becomes a permanent marketplace. So you'll never miss us. We'll always be there now forever, waiting for you in the dark. But you can get an issue anytime. It's not a limited run. We'll be on Amazon and stuff soon as well. So it's all happening at 13 Dark. Yeah, people can expect their issues around September time.
Awesome. I am looking forward to it. I'm excited to get to read some of the stories because I know what Eden writes based on her writing, and I'm really excited to see what is coming out from those that are in the the 13 Dark, and even with Storgy and everything else that you're involved with.
Oh, thank you. And thank you as well for being such a great supporter and for interviewing, you interview Eden anyway because she's an amazing writer, but, for interviewing her about 13 Dark and for, helping us along and tweeting about us, it all makes a really big difference. So I really appreciate that.
Well, it is my pleasure. For those who are listening to this episode with you, Joe, what are some of the best places for them to either take a look at your work or follow you on social media? Best places for not only for yourself, but for 13 Dark or any other project that you're involved in?
Facebook and Twitter are generally where we hang out. So on Facebook, we have a page which is Project 13 Dark. So just www.facebook.com/project13dark, all one word, no hyphens or anything. And then on Twitter, we are at Project 13 Dark. I believe, I'm pretty sure. I've got to check that now. Yeah, we're at Project 13 Dark. So again, all one word, no spaces or anything. That's the best place to find news about what we're doing with that. And from that, you will be able to find links to all our writers, our artists. We're regularly posting up stuff that Sean's been working on. It's just a real visual fest. I mean, even if you're not going to buy it, I just follow it to get a bit of art on your Twitter feed once in a while. It's just amazing. And then for me, the best place is my website, which is themindflayer.com. So all one word, The Mind Flayer. It's kind of a reference to some Demon Souls, the video game, and Dungeons and Dragons. It's kind of a classic Dungeons and Dragons villain.
It is indeed. Yep.
yeah. So, and that's kind of, I guess, what I'm trying to do with my writing is flay minds. So, hence the name.
All right, awesome. Well, for those listening, I'll have links to everything on the show notes and on our Facebook page, Tales from the Fandom. Joe, it's been an extreme pleasure to get to talk to you.
Likewise, it's been such a pleasure to be on the show. Thank you so much. It's been really, really great.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Tales from the Fandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.